repeat his best placement, and if David Mancusco can reach those heights once again. Let's get into this game number 1, shall we?
The first leads of our top cut matches, we have Rillaboom and Dragapult for David. Exeggutor right off the bat alongside the Indeedee for Parker. And because Rillaboom is faster than Indeedee, the Psychic Surge will activate second, leaving Psychic Terrain up on the field, protecting both of Parker's Pokemon from any kind of fake out.
I'm looking at Expanding Force.
I know.
Exeggutor is so ready to rock with this terrain in its control. But Dragapult is still going to be the fastest thing on the field right now, unless we do see this Torkoal switch in and set up this Chlorophyll on the Exeggutor.
Very possible there. That would make Exeggutor very fast. Double its speed with the Chlorophyll. Indeedee does swap out. So Rosemary, you might have nailed it here. This Exeggutor wants to be moving fast and hitting hard. Drought will activate, setting up the sun, and Exeggutor will be super speedy.
So how is this Rillaboom actually going to deal with this? Because I think there are some options here for you to be able to go for some pretty heavy hitting damage, but you've got the resist there onto the Exeggutor. Well, not anymore now because it's going to be a Psychic type.
Yeah, this is going right off the bat. Immediate full offense. Exeggutor will act first with Expanding Force with the Psychic Terrain and Psychic Terra Boost. This will be a lot of damage.
Oh my goodness, Dragapult is just going to get knocked out in one hit. We have seen this far too often on this stream, that one of the fastest Pokemon in the format does not get a chance to actually move.
Nice call there with the high horsepower. That would have been the Indeedee slot, which means that this Torkoal now takes a lot of damage coming in, but does it matter? Like, this Exeggutor is still super fast. Psychic Terrain is still up. And Magmar can't redirect Expanding Force. You can go for like an Overheat, bring it down to its Focus Sash, but it still is going to be around. This Expanding Force, I don't know how you stop this if you're David.
You have nothing to resist it.
No.
Except for something like the Kingambit, so you could switch that in, and then you are going to be immune to any Expanding Force, but you still have to deal with the fact that this Torkoal has access to Weather Ball, which is going to deal super effective Fire-type damage into that slot. So if this Expanding Force is going to knock out this Magmar in one hit, then it would be vulnerable, but not to be. This Magmar still gets a chance to fire back with an Overheat to knock out this Torkoal before it gets a chance to fire off an attack.
Well, that's a great play from David there, knowing that Magmar is bulky enough to survive an Expanding Force thanks to that Eviolite, and knowing that Kingambit will be immune to that Expanding Force, smartly targeting that Torkoal with Overheat, taking advantage of the sun it's set up and the Torkoal's lower special defense, making sure that Kingambit, which is very heavily threatened by something like a Weather Ball, like you called out, Rosemary, will be able to stick around. And now I think if David wants to win this game, this Kingambit will be very important. Again, it's the only thing that will be resisting, and in this case being immune to the Expanding Force. Very strong into the Exeggutor, but you still have the option to possibly go for a Sleep Powder. Magmar will be able to redirect something like Energy Ball, which I don't know you'd ever go for that in this case, but the Magmar having the Vital Spirit actually is really important here, because if the Exeggutor opts for a Sleep Powder, then it will be redirected and useless.
Kingambit is out of here. It's very important that David is going to be able to get this grassy terrain back in his hands so that he can actually go for something like this Sucker Punch, threaten a KO onto this solo Psychic type Exeggutor. And it's also going to make this Expanding Force single target. So going into the Magmar, it's going to also not have the terrain boost anymore, but it's still going to be enough damage to send this Magmar packing. And, oh, this poor Rillaboom. At least this Ursaluna doesn't have its guts activated yet. So this Rillaboom can hang on through that Headlong Rush. And in fact, the Ursaluna does get its defenses dropped for that trouble. That's
a very important survival there from Rillaboom, because if it goes down, the Ursaluna can kind of freely just wait for the Exeggutor to get knocked out, have Indeedee come in, and then have it redirect any attacks from Kingambit, which will allow it to knock it out with something like the Headlong Rush. But Rillaboom now sticks around. It is threatening super effective damage into this Ursaluna, but of course this Exeggutor is still the fastest thing on the field. Indeedee can very easily swap in and set up the Psychic Terrain, which will protect Exeggutor from Fake Out, from Sucker Punch, and allow it to deal with this Rillaboom, so this Ursaluna can be safe for later and then handle Kingambit afterwards.
So Indeedee is going to come in, and it's going to be that Psychic Terrain active for the rest of this game because David is down to his final two Pokemon. This Kingambit still has an opportunity to go for this Kowtow Cleave, which would be plenty, to actually knock out this Exeggutor, but you still have that Focus Sash as an held item for the Exeggutor to have to deal with. I love the Terra Dark, though. You're going to be boosting up those Dark-type attacks even further, and you're also going to get rid of your weakness as your Steel-type to something like that Headlong Rush from the Ursaluna in the back. Also keeps you very safe from these Expanding Forces. So unfortunately, Rillaboom, this offense is not going to help you for this particular turn. You just don't have enough HP to withstand that attack.
David is reduced down to his final Pokemon, which is this Terra Dark Black Glasses King Gambit. Cat-Tail Cleave comes out here, will be enough to easily one-hit KO this Indeedee. You have to wonder if that's going to be enough. The Ursaluna is still very healthy in the back. Now that you're no longer a Steel type, you've activated the ability for Ursaluna to just use Facade, and that will not be lowering your defense and special defense, which makes you even more bulky for the remainder of this game. Again, Psychic Terrain is still up, so you can't Sucker Punch his Exeggutor. Energy Ball is no longer weak and resisted into this King Gambit, so I think Parker has more than enough offense to finish off this game.
You're just going to have to hope that maybe the Kowtow Cleave is going to be able to go first and be enough to knock out this Ursaluna. If there is something like a crit, you do have this Terra Dark, but it's just a bulky bear. No hibernating for this Ursaluna as it goes on the offense. Takes the knockout onto the King Gambit, and Parker wins game number 1.
It's not been a good weekend for Dragapult's led into Pokemon that have abilities that double when weather conditions are active, has it?
No, it has not.
First Basculegion and then Exeggutor just preying on these poor Dragapults that have no protect, no way to reset terrain or weather. That was just a crazy start. A lot of explosive offense coming up from Parker. You look at a team like Parker's and you think, okay, maybe there's like the option for the fast mode with the Exeggutor, but instead that seems to be like the main game plan here. It's not an option, it is number 1, going immediately for those huge expanding forces.
Dragapult needs a meteorology a degree. I don't even know if that would help it, actually. You gotta tutor this poor Pokemon.
I do want to call out what I think was a really smart play. The turn that Parker used Expanding Force to knock out Magmar as the Rillaboom switched in, and it took this Headlong Rush. When you use Expanding Force in terrain, it does hit both targets, but you are manually selecting a target every time, and if the terrain does happen to get shut off before the Expanding Force goes off, it will hit that one target instead of both. And he selected the Magmar on that turn to make sure it got knocked out, even if Rillaboom swapped in like it did. So really heads up there just to know that Magmar is more important of a target than I believe the King Gambit that was next to it at that point. Just because the Magmar, if it was able to break the possible Focus Sash on that Exeggutor, that could have gone a little bit differently for Parker, but ensuring that Magmar is gone, you get David down to his final 2 Pokemon, you reestablish your terrain control for the rest of the game and set up the Exeggutor to sweep.
I wonder if David just needs to bring the Rillaboom in the back. If you expect that this Indeedee is going to be led again, then maybe you do have to come in and get rid of the terrain before you see this Exeggutor go all out on the offense with these expanding forces. Because we saw that Rillaboom lose that speed interaction where Indeedee did have a Psychic Terrain set up at the end of the day.
That's true. I think that it would be a much safer play for David, especially because if you lead Rillaboom and Parker doesn't lead the Indeedee, he can also just easily switch it in immediately and get the Psychic Terrain up. So having Rillaboom in the back to switch in and possibly reduce the power of that Expanding Force could be a much safer strategy. We do see there is no Rillaboom on the field just yet. Indeedee Exeggutor once again for Parker, but King Gambit and Magmar, a much safer lead, and I think a much stronger lead in this position for David, rather.
Yes, I like this lead a lot better, especially when you look at this King Gambit. You do have that Terra Dark to make sure that you aren't going to be taking any damage from these Psychic type attacks if you wanted to boost up your offense even further. And now you could switch in the Rillaboom if you really want to.
You could. This is actually a prime position for Rillaboom to come in, especially if Parker doesn't swap out this Indeedee. It becomes really safe for this Rillaboom. You turn off the spread damage from the Expanding Force. Rillaboom is pretty heavily threatening Indeedee in general. Woodhammer is not something Indeedee loves to take, and of course Sleep Powder is not effective into grass types as well. But Indeedee, wanting to be able to come back in later, will switch out to Ursaluna.
So Ursaluna now going to be on the receiving end of a potential attack, but the King Gambit also doesn't want to catch that smoke. Ends up going back into its ball as well to be replaced by this Rillaboom. So grassy terrain now active on the field, and it comes down to Exeggutor versus Magmar.
This is a really safe position for David now. The Psychic Terrain is gone. Overheat comes through and should be able to break this Focus Sash on Exeggutor, bringing it all the way down to 1 HP. Both of the Pokemon on David's side of the field are immune to Sleep Powder, Rillaboom being a grass type and Magmar having the Vital Spirit ability. So a much better spot to be in Expanding Force without the damage boost. Does a little bit under half to Magmar there, but thanks to the grassy terrain, we'll have the chance to recover it right back up.
Looks like it's going to be a 4-hit knockout if you just keep hitting away with those Expanding Forces, a single target. But this Ursaluna has something to say about it. It has the ability to go for this Ghost Terra, which would actually put it in a position where you don't have an opportunity to fake it out.
No fake out possible because we do see the Ghost Terra coming through, and of course the Indeedee switching in to set up the Psychic Terrain that will no longer have reduced power on Earthquake, so that could be very important here on this turn. The Ursaluna is looking to have a big offensive impact, and we will see it Terastallize right away, the Ghost typing coming through.
Ghost typing is also not necessarily just good for the fake out, but it's also good to make sure that this Ursaluna isn't going to be taking increased damage from something like a Wood Hammer from this Rillaboom. You're also shutting off the priority in general, so you couldn't even go for something like a Grassy Glide if you wanted to. This Magmar has had its special attack dropped by 2 stages thanks to the overheat that turn prior, so it's not going to be doing a whole lot to this Indeedee so far, but you can see how this Wood Hammer would have been able to do some major damage to this Ursaluna, but cannot otherwise.
Earthquake comes through, will hit all Pokemon on the field. Magmar goes down, Rillaboom takes that very well, but Indeedee, because it did take the overheat from the Magmar on the swap, and because its Psychic Seed was consumed earlier on in this game, actually takes a whole lot of damage here, and looks, it's in a spot where one more attack from Rillaboom should be able to knock it out. The Wood Hammer does some really good damage into that Ursaluna as well, so now David's in a much stronger spot. This Indeedee can no longer Terastallize or anything, it can't resist those grass type moves, being the Grass Terra itself. If David does have the King Gambit, or sorry, not the Dragapult in this game, this would be a nice turn to bring it in, but King Gambit also really good here because Rillaboom should act first, could knock out the Indeedee with any of its attacks, and then King Gambit has the chance to fire off a Kowtow Cleave into that Ursaluna, which now will take super effective damage.
This Ursaluna is certainly not long for this world, so I think you have to try to go for a big knockout here and now, otherwise you're going to lose that Ursaluna and a huge piece of your offense for the rest of this game number 2. But I love the position that David has put himself in here. This Rillaboom makes a nice target for something like the Facade, but I think you should also consider that this King Gambit, if left alone in front of this Exeggutor and this Indeedee, will not take any damage.
Yeah, this King Gambit now in a much stronger spot. The Exeggutor being down to very, very low HP is very good for David, especially considering that we gave it so much trouble in that first game. Follow Me does come through, will redirect attacks from both of David's Pokemon, but because Indeedee is so low on HP, High Horsepower knocks it out and King Gambit gets a free swing.
Especially if King Gambit is able to move first. Ursaluna are usually pretty slow, and so this is going to be the case. King Gambit gets the Kowtow Cleave off into the Ursaluna, and now it is super effective. So if it was doing 50% damage before, it is certainly a KO now.
Really big for David now. He's taken the Pokemon lead for the first time in this set, and now Parker is down to his final 2 Pokemon. It will be this Exeggutor at 11 HP, and this Torkoal, which does still have all of its HP remaining, is threatening some pretty scary eruptions here. But this Exeggutor, especially if Rillaboom finds a way to swap out and back in, will no longer be protected by something like a Sucker Punch, even a Fake Out if Rillaboom can pivot itself back out.
The problem is, though, this King Gambit's going to knock out this Exeggutor before this Torkoal gets a chance to swing.
Yeah.
So I think even though you know that this Exeggutor is the fastest thing on the field now, thanks to that Chlorophyll ability activated, you still have to deal with the fact that this King Gambit could just get that free punch in. It is the Dragapult in the back, though, so maybe this is one of those opportunities where you go, Dragapult, this is your one job. Your duty is to come in and take this hit so that Rillaboom can come back in later.
Yeah, Dragapult, unfortunately, not getting a whole lot done in either of these games, but I think even in this case, this is still a big win for David. You are able to bring the Rillaboom back in, which will get rid of the Psychic Terrain. It will set up Grassy Terrain once again. So now Exeggutor has to worry about Fake Out. It has to worry about Sucker Punch. It does have the option for Sleep Powder, but it does not have Protect, unfortunately, so it cannot be... There's no way to dodge a Fake Out coming out from this Rillaboom. It should be able to knock out the Exeggutor. I believe David still has Terastallization available to him, so you could pretty easily go for a Terra Dark on this King Gambit, get a bunch of damage off with Kowtow Cleave, remove your Fire type weakness, and make sure that Eruption is not doing huge damage to both Pokemon on David's side.
There's the Terra. I think you're okay just making sure that this Rillaboom can stick around. The Fire Terra, the perfect call. Make sure that you also are able to deal with this Torkoal. Because Rillaboom, too, it can provide a lot of offensive pressure to something like the Torkoal because you still have high horsepower available to you. So the Fake Out is able to knock out this Exeggutor and leave this Torkoal all by itself. The final Pokemon standing in the way of David Mancusco winning this game and bringing us to a game number 3. The Kowtow Cleave is able to help bring this Torkoal down to about half HP, so this Eruption is not going to hurt nearly as much. Unfortunately for King Gambit, though, missed the memo on that Steel typing, so it does get knocked out to that attack.
That's also a smart Terra there. Of course, the fire means that Rillaboom should be able to stand up to this Torkoal, and because it does have high horsepower, is actually going to have enough damage in the tank to take it out. Provided high horsepower doesn't miss, of course, there is a small chance, but enough for the KO right off the bat with the critical hit. Don't need to worry about hitting 2 of them when he can just hit 1, huh?
That is so true, though. Assault Vest was so nice to have on this Rillaboom as well, because you know that you have that defensive Terrifier, but you also have the opportunity to survive some of these special attacks from this Torkoal when you know that you're going to be resisting them as well. So really, really safe endgame there for David to have set himself up in. And we're going to a game number 3 in this Top Cut match.
We sure are, and this has been 2 really entertaining games so far. Seeing the way that these 2 teams interact with each other has been really cool because you have to worry about this terrain control. So far, the player that has better control over the terrain on the field has won each game, and I think that's going to be the case in Game 3 as well. Psychic terrain is really important for Parker's team. Not only does it boost up the power and spread of the expanding force, but you save yourself from the sucker punches, from the fake outs, from the grassy glides, which get really important pieces in David's team. Because if this is Executor is the fastest thing on the field, and you don't have a way to hit it with priority moves, it's going to be really hard to stop it.
It's going to be very difficult. And we saw that David made that adjustment to bring the Rillaboom in the back rather than leading it at the very beginning so that he had the opportunity to switch it in, actually get that grassy terrain right away rather than giving up that terrain control immediately to Parker's Indeedee. So as we head into this game number 3, I kind of wonder if there's going to be any sort of switch up here from Parker. Leading the Indeedee was good. Having the ability to have Executor go all out on the offensive with the Sun, also very good. But do you want to consider maybe, is it really Indeedee plus Executor? Is it Indeedee plus something else? Do you actually want to set up Trick Room for this particular matchup? We haven't seen that at all.
Exactly. This is ostensibly like a very Trick Room focused team that hasn't used Trick Room once at all in these first 2 games. I understand it though. This Executor is really threatening into David's team, and when Trick Room is up, and Sun is also up, this Executor is going to be moving last. So it makes sense to kind of stay away from the Trick Room, and you kind of probably lose too much steam with the Indeedee trying to protect that Executor to then set up the Trick Room later on without getting knocked out first. The Magmar also becoming a really important piece for David here and kind of showing why it's used over Electabuzz on some of these teams, because the higher offensive output with Overheat, and specifically the Fire typing here, are coming in very handy. Having that Fire type resist in the form of Magmar to kind of stifle the Torkoal a little bit. We saw it knock out Torkoal from over half of its HP remaining with that Overheat in the Sun as well, something Electabuzz could not have done. So Magmar proving its worth here on David's team. I'm mostly wondering, Rosemary, is Dragapult going to get to attack this game?
I think there are some pretty good odds that it will not, but maybe it isn't even in this game as we enter into the final game of this best of 3. Ooh. David and Parker fighting for a spot to keep their dreams alive in this Top Cut, as David's going to have the King Gambit and the Magmar, and Parker are switching things up, the Indeedee and the Gallade.
I like this mix-up a lot. The Gallade now threatens the King Gambit very heavily. Of course, Sacred Sword, boosted by that Sharpness ability, is huge damage, possibly even enough to KO it if the King Gambit terrestrializes into the solo Dark type. It is also Terra Fire Gallade, which could come in very handy, resisting damage from the Magmar, resisting damage from Rillaboom, and more importantly, you cannot be burned by Will-O-Wisp from Magmar if you are that Fire type.
Do we finally get to see it?
Maybe.
I kind of wonder. I don't know. I'm giddy right now. Do we actually see our Trick Room team commit to Trick Room? Who's to say? It's going to be Indeedee now after giving away the terrain, going to keep himself safe for just a little bit later, as David is going to bring out that trusty Rillaboom, knowing that there is that Sacred Sword available. Now you know the Rillaboom can take that just a little bit better. And you've got the Grassy Surge as well, as Magmar gets a chance to go for the Will-O-Wisp, but it's going to miss the Gallade. So this Terra, the save of Terra on the Gallade is going to be a big deal, knowing that the Terra is available for their Ursaluna now.
Yeah, that is really huge for Parker. Dodging that Will-O-Wisp, and not using your terrestrialization to become a Fire type and guarantee that you don't get burned saves you a huge resource, like you said, Rosemary. This terrestrialization can be really big for this Ursaluna to make sure that it doesn't get hit by super effective attacks from this Rillaboom. Of course, being a Ghost type also makes you immune to Fake Out later on in this game. And the Gallade now at full HP alongside this Ursaluna. 2 very, very strong physical attackers that are going to have a great time now that Trick Room has finally gone up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Ursaluna, Gallade, they're eating pretty good right now. As this Magmar is also sort of a sitting duck. Maybe quite literally.
Yeah, I mean, this Earthquake threatens some very strong spread damage. We saw in Game 2 that Parker is not afraid to Earthquake his own Pokemon, especially now that Indeedee comes back in. It looks like we're going to see another combination Psychic Terrain and Earthquake coming out from Parker.
Love the just sheer confidence from Parker to go for an Earthquake and deal damage to your own partner. And as David switches into King Gambit, I don't think he's going to be super happy about what is about to happen. You've got this terrestrialization that's going to come through first, and then... oh no.
Yeah, Ursaluna does become a ghost type, will protect itself from those fake outs, from those wood hammers during this game. And unless this Magmar terrestrializes, which it is, a little bit of a saving grace for David there, so the Magmar should be able to stick around for a few more turns. Becomes a ghost type itself. You know, you've got some dueling ghosts here, but this Earthquake is going to be huge. This damage is going to most likely just knock out King Gambit straight up into a big chunk to Magmar, which should set up Parker very well for the rest of this game.
I mean, with the Guts boost activated, the King Gambit is actually going to have enough to stay around. So the overheat to knock out the Indeedee is pretty big here. But it's not over just yet. David is still in the thick of the woods right now with this King Gambit on such low HP.
So, okay, could have gotten much worse for David there. Earthquake was a great call. King Gambit does take a lot of damage coming in, but Indeedee is knocked out, and we did say terrain control was a deciding factor in the first two games. If Rillaboom does switch back in, Sucker Punch is on the table. Fake Out and Grassy Glide are on the table. Now that Ursaluna is a ghost type, it is much more vulnerable to this King Gambit if it is able to get either a Sucker Punch or a Kowtow Cleave off. So a lot of damage being taken from David there, but a smart overheat target means that Indeedee, if the combination of Earthquake and Overheat is knocked out, and David can have Grassy Terrain up.
This is risky, though, and Parker has a very big decision to make. Do you try to call the bluff and David doesn't actually go for a Sucker Punch into the Ursaluna, or do you try to play around that and actually try to go for some type of pivot? It's going to be the latter. Parker going to save that Ursaluna in the face of this Dark King Gambit and put the Gallade out in its place. David not falling for it. It's going to be a protect on the King Gambit. This Magmar, it's got something to say about it.
I think it's a really smart play from David there. I think you need to preserve this King Gambit until you can guarantee that it gets to attack this Ursaluna. And because Parker does still have a third Pokemon, that's a pretty easy swap out into that Gallade. You're not taking any Sucker Punch damage. Of course, Psychic Terrain is still up, so on this turn, if David wanted to get rid of the terrain, the Rillaboom just takes an eruption on the way in and immediately gets knocked out, which I don't think you can afford either. So now Rillaboom does come back. Fake Out is in play, so you can fake out either the Gallade or the Torkoal to make sure they don't attack this turn. And we still have yet to see David's fourth Pokemon as well. If it is that Dragapult, actually looking like it could be a pretty strong piece of this puzzle once Trick Room expires.
And then we would get a chance to see a Dragapult attack. That could be a pretty big deal.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, this turn could be that deciding factor as we take a look at this Gallade and this Torkoal versus this King Gambit and Rillaboom setup. David has an opportunity to go for a fake out onto either of these pieces, but what do you actually think is going to be the bigger threat?
I don't know. It's really hard to say because this Torkoal is still at full HP. Will be not hit by the fake out, so it is flinching this turn. And we have to see how speeds work out. King Gambit goes first.
That's a big deal. A lot of King Gambit right now actually trained to be faster in Trick Room over something like the Gallade. So it gets to fire off this powerful Kowtow Cleave before it gets knocked out in the process, and this Rillaboom gets to stay at full HP.
Really big there. That King Gambit speed stat is very important in this matchup. Like you said, a lot of them are a little bit faster and likely are attacking before Gallade outside of Trick Room that might be trained to be as slow as possible. The Dragapult does come in here. That means that it might get the chance to fire off an attack for the first time in this set. Grassy Glide now is an option for David, which would knock out the Gallade and possibly allow Dragapult to try and 1v2 the rest of this game against the Torkoal and the Ursaluna.
The problem, though, is that this Torkoal is still going to be the fastest thing in Trick Room, so it has an opportunity here with the HP pool that it has to just go for a big eruption. So this Rillaboom's going to have to hope that this Assault Vest is going to be enough, or that this Grassy Glide was going to be a good enough sacrifice for this Rillaboom. It is going to get knocked out in the process, but this Dragapult is going to help resist a lot of that damage thanks to the fact that it is a Dragon type. But there's an Ursaluna in the back here. Parker has been waiting, and it's going to be the fan Phantom Force to try to stall out this final turn of Trick Room.
That's smart. Phantom Force there means that the Dragapult will be able to attack immediately next turn. And knowing that Grassy Glide came through, that might mean that David targeted that slot to make sure that this Ursaluna gets hit by the Phantom Force. You cannot protect in front of Phantom Force. It will be broken. But unfortunately, I think that no matter which target this Phantom Force hits, the other Pokemon has enough juice left to take the knockout. We saw Eruption do over half. Now that it's only hitting one Pokemon, it only gets stronger. Phantom Force comes through here, does want to KO Ursaluna, but Torkoal gets to fire off Eruption.
Yeah, that critical hit's not going to matter here when it's going to be super effective damage anyway. So this Torkoal with the Weather Ball as well, you know it's going to end up being this Fire-type attack, single target into this Dragapult. If it's able to stick around, it gets to go for another Choice Band Phantom Force, but it's not going to. So Parker Simmons, with that 2-1 victory, moves on to the next round of Top Cut.
Really well played by Parker there. That immediate expanding force in game one put David on the back foot at the very start of this set. David was able to recover and take game two, but Parker mixed it up expertly.